be invited to give this keynote on your yearly meeting's 40th anniversary. My first few yearly meetings as a child started in 1968. And that was a time when Pacific Yearly Meeting included some of the Intermountain Yearly Meeting monthly meetings. I was pleased to hear yesterday that PYM released Arizona and New Mexico. I was worried we may have been greedy and kept them. My other connection to Intermountain Yearly Meeting is through Intermountain Yearly Meeting friends over the years. In 1978, in Idaho Springs, Colorado, I attended my first YFNA, my first Young Friends of North America gathering, where I met Penny Trone Weber and Bruce Weber. This gathering was a seminal moment for me in experiencing Quakerism. I think for many of us it was a very powerful, Young Friends of North America was a very powerful experience for many of us. And thank you for supporting me in helping to bring three wonderful Pacific Yearly Meeting young friends to Intermountain Yearly Meeting. And thank you for your gracious generosity. Each of these three friends are following an inner teacher and living their lives following leadings. And if you have an opportunity to talk with them, they're doing some very interesting work in their lives. You may notice that we have a number of friends sitting on the facing bench and the facing chairs. They're helping us during this time, during this morning. Many of these friends came early to help hold the space in preparation for this talk, and I thank them for doing this. I'm first going to give an introduction which will set the context for this talk and then provide an outline of what I'll be saying. You may have noticed that Kylan's accompanying me. She's providing eldering for me at this gathering, and many of us have this concept of eldering as telling somebody what not to do. But eldering has this very important role of spiritual formation and support. And her role is important in helping me stay on the edge of the Spirit, not outrunning it or falling behind the leading of the Spirit. She's also helping me to be prepared inwardly so I can be faithful to the truth. And it's a real honor to have my daughter doing this for me. I've had a number of young people over the years at different gatherings, but it's special to have her this time. Many of our young people have deep wisdom and faith. We need to recognize and utilize their gifts. And before I delve into this talk too much, I'd like to reflect on the role of younger friends in the creation of the Religious Society of Friends. The young people ignited the Religious Society of Friends in the 1650s. And George Fox in 1652 was 28 years old. Okay, so a lot of early Quakers were young people with the fire, with the sense of purpose, with not knowing what they're doing in their lives and having that part of them become the ministry of what we've inherited. And that spirit among young people is still there. Several of the early friends that I'll be quoting were in their late teens or early 20s when they had experiences I'll be referring to. And so a question I have is, what can we do to support these younger friends who are serious about their spiritual lives and about the revitalization of the Religious Society of Friends? When Kylan and Elena returned from the Quaker Youth Pilgrimage in 2008, they were on fire. And knowing that what they experienced in our meetings and gatherings did not live up to the legacy of Quakerism that they were introduced to during the pilgrimage, I saw this fire. And when I saw it, it reminded me of when I returned from YFNA in 1978. And I realized we, the young friends, needed to educate ourselves and learn the practices that truly guide us as a people. The one thing that I've learned about discernment over the years is that our guide has a much bigger plan and a more exquisite method for bringing it about than my narrow view of what I can perceive. My limited planning abilities and my lack of power to create the ways to open. This Spirit has a very powerful way of leading us. When I'm in the power of that Spirit, the way opens, and I start to see the bigger picture with my limited perspective. How much do we trust that higher power to lead us and to give us the strength and strategies to be effective in supporting the unfolding of the larger vision on earth It's somewhat of a mystery. And discernment is about mystery. So this talk is about that question. How much do we trust that higher power to lead us and to give us the strength and strategies to be effective in supporting the unfolding of its larger vision on Earth? In my role as reading clerk for Pacific Yearly Meeting this year, I had the wonderful opportunity to read epistles from all over the world. And in reading the Intermountain Yearly Meeting epistle from last year, I loved the query that was embedded in it. How is God calling you to live in the vision of the world that we seek? I was excited when I was contacted about coming here to speak, especially the theme, practicing spiritual discernment. Where does the light lead us now? There are two phrases in that theme, spiritual discernment and light lead us, which I translate into the word leadings. Your program committee has been wonderful. I've had a number of conversations, and they've reminded me that Quaker process is caught, not taught. An Intermountain Yearly Meeting is looking for a collective leading. And what would it look like? That we want to move beyond the mode of navel gazing. So I hope this talk helps Intermountain Yearly Meeting with your process of discernment. I found that in order to better comprehend discernment, we need to understand how early Quakers were individually led and the processes early friends developed for staying true to our calling. What I will be talking about today comes from both my experiences of being faithful to the Spirit as I've lived my life, and also it is informed by readings of early friends that I began studying in my late teens. Discernment is not about knowing. It's about not knowing. Discernment is about not knowing. How do we know that we don't know? Leadings are grounded in humility. The humility of not knowing, but being open to learning and being guided. What can we do to prepare ourselves to discern the larger will? I've been interested in the historical Quaker approach to action lived from a place of contemplation and guidance by the Spirit. And this talk is about things that get in the way of discernment and the traditions and ways we can align ourselves with the Spirit, which is at the core of discernment. I'm going to be reading some quotes from friends. Be aware how this language makes you feel. And notice if you find this language triggering or distracting to you. And if it does that, then substitute the words that make you feel more comfortable so that you can hear the truth behind what these friends are saying. I'd like to start with this little exercise. If you could close your eyes. Just notice your feet on the floor. Just notice, are they flat on the floor, or do you have your legs crossed? Notice your lower body and how it's resting on the chair. Notice your shoulders and your arms. Notice your hands. What are they making contact with? Bring your awareness inside and notice your throat. Notice inside your chest. Notice your upper abdomen and your belly. Be aware of your body. Quakerism is a visceral religion. Discernment is felt in our bodies. There are somatic-based or body-based psychotherapies which are effective because they bypass the filter of the intellect and the ego and help patients go within to understand what is really going on. The sense I have is that the intelligence of Quakerism has to do with how our bodies are wired. The highest density of neurons we have are in our head, in our brainstem. The second highest is in our belly, in our abdomen. And our third highest density of neurons is around the heart. And the sense that I've had throughout my life is that Quakerism is about the intelligence of the neurons around our gut and our heart. And for some reason, they've discovered how to filter that and use that. Our name Quakers was about quaking. But more importantly, our tradition is transmitted through visceral language, in the sense of the meeting. For those of you that have clerked, you sense it in your body when unity is being reached. Being moved to speak. Holding you in the light. Holding a concern. My experiences of Quakerism when I was around 10 years old was a visceral experience. I had an experience in Claremont Meeting in Southern California, a meeting I grew up in. The night before members of our meeting were going to attend a protest against the Vietnam War, and it was not clear if anyone would be arrested or if the provocateurs would incite rioting and anyone would get hurt. The night before the protest, there was a meeting at someone's home. And my father brought me along, and I remember laying down on the floor behind the couch. I did not know what was taking place, but I could feel the depth, the weight, the gravity of the situation. Again, I had this same experience in Orange Grove meeting when the meeting was harboring AWOLs during the Vietnam War. My family would bring meals on Thursday evenings. We would drive from Pomona to Pasadena. And I would be playing with the other children, running around the meeting house and exploring the basement. One of these times, we went upstairs, and there was a sense of seriousness and stillness. We found out that there was a called meeting for worship, because the FBI was standing outside the meeting house, and they were threatening to come into the meeting house and arrest the men who were AWOL. Again, I felt the weight. I felt the stillness of the situation. There's a gravity that the Spirit brings that we connect with. Growing up in my yearly meetings youth programs, I was able to develop a sensitivity or interbarometer of connection to the Spirit. And most of the young people I talk to that grow up in our gatherings find this as well. We learn to be vulnerable, to share the truth that we see, and to know that the others around will continue to accept us and support us and hold us, even in our woundedness. This barometer that's developed inside of us becomes very important in understanding if you are experiencing true community or if you are experiencing something else when you're with other people. A lot of the times, the standard of connection at young friends gatherings is so high that it's hard for young friends to participate in our meetings because they do not hold the same level of connection, and the young people can feel it. But many of us are familiar with the way opening as a part of discernment. Parker Palmer, in his book, Let Your Life Speak, relates a story from his time at Pendle Hill where he expected to find new clarity and direction. Quote, "But when I arrived and started sharing my vocational quandary, people responded with a traditional Quaker counsel that, despite their good intentions, left me even more discouraged. Have faith, they said, and way will open. I have faith, I thought to myself. What I don't have is time to wait for Way to open. I'm approaching middle age at warp speed, and I have yet to find a vocational path that feels right. The only way that's opened so far is the wrong way. He goes on. After a few months of deepening frustration, I took my troubles to an older Quaker woman, well known for her thoughtfulness and candor. Ruth, I said, people keep telling me that Way will open. Well, I sit in the silence, I pray, I listen for my calling, but Way is not opening. I've been trying to find my vocation for a long time, and I still don't have the foggiest idea of what I'm meant to do. Way may open for other people, but it's sure not opening for me. Ruth's reply was a model of Quaker plain speaking. I'm a birthright friend, she said somberly, and in 60-plus years of living, Way has never opened in front of me. She paused, and I started sinking into despair. Was this wise woman telling me that the Quaker concept of God's guidance was a hoax? Then she spoke again, this time with a grin. But a lot of Way has closed behind me, and that's had the same guiding effect. If the way is not opening, maybe the way is closing. God has many ways to speak to us, but are we willing to listen? We have to be careful here, too. In my work, I face a lot of resistance in reforming community college educational models for at-risk and underprepared young adults. And sometimes one can mistake this resistance as the way closing. It has been very helpful for me to have an anchor committee for the last 11 years, provided to me by my meeting to help me in the discernment of this leading, to help me differentiate resistance from the way closing. Discernment requires waking up from the trance of the dominant culture, the veil that is over our eyes, the water we swim in. In a workshop titled Challenges of the Abundant Life at the 2009 Friends Association for Higher Education Conference at Guilford College, the leaders stated, for early Friends, abundant life meant being diverse to, or cross to, or at odds with, the models of success in the world around them. I'll repeat that. The abundant life meant being diverse to, or cross to, or at odds with the models of success in the world around them. The desire of the workshop was to reclaim the dynamism of the Quaker tradition in our own experience, as we, like early Friends, are at odds with the taken-for-granted assumptions of the dominant culture of our day and age. And at times, our own inner assumptions become our toughest challenges. So what are we doing to help our young friends to discern within the context of the dominant culture where their lives are going? When should you go to college? Of course, when you graduate from high school. When should you graduate from college? Of course, 4 years after you start. What professions should you pursue? Of course, follow your heart and your leading, but make sure there are jobs available in this field too. What trances are we living right now in the dominant culture? What are our trances? I dropped out of college. I realized that I needed to focus on contemplation and spiritual readings. Also, the young adult community was coalescing at that time, and I felt a call to leadership. Little did I know that the odyssey I was about to begin on would take me places I couldn't imagine. I became trained in what was called the Feldenkrais method of somatic-based therapy because I had a back problem I needed to fix. I started a software company with Quakers from Berkeley meeting in the nascent microcomputer field. I graduated from college at the age of 28 and finally knowing what I wanted to study. And then studying social change in the belly of the beast at Harvard Business School in order to bring Quaker principles into corporate America. I couldn't have imagined what I was doing when I dropped out of college. And I think that's the power of the spirit that knows a hell of a lot more than what I know. There's this bigger picture. The way opened, what sometimes is called synchronicity, happened so many different times. I couldn't have planned it. What is our testimony in the digital age? What are the visible steps we're taking as Quakers to have a living testimony? How do we wake up from the trance of the dominant culture? Early friends spent a lot of time working on waking up from that trance. It was that trance that they were concerned about. It was the lifting of the veil that they developed processes to help deal with. In discernment, fallow times are really important. A lot of times we think discernment and leadings are about doing things. What do I need to do next? What am I leading to do? Well, a lot of times it's about slowing down. Discernment, insights, and openings occur for me when I'm resting, when I'm eating, taking a shower, taking a break, going for a walk. It's in the waiting, waking up in the morning, sitting and reflecting when I'm at conferences, in meetings that the Spirit creeps behind the veil and helps me to see and to prioritize my life. Margaret Fell referred to this as the circumcision of the heart. And Steve Crisp, another friend who was born in 1652, discusses the veil being taken away. This happens when we wake up from our old habits and judgments. We wake up from our pride. We wake up from our privilege. We start to look at our entitlement. Being so sure that what I see is the truth, holding on without knowing that my holding on is obstructing the Spirit. How tight do we hold on to what we think the truth is? Can you let go? I found at YFNA in 1978, sitting in a meeting for worship, considering business. And it was very powerful because what I learned was all I could bring was a facet of the truth, if that. And I could bring a facet of an inkling of what I think the truth was. And all I could do to be faithful was to share it and then let go of it. It's a mystery where the unity is going to take us. And as long as I hold on to what I think the truth is, the less we're able to smoothly to get there. And that doesn't mean that I'm not going to state something that's contrary to what's being stated in the meeting. It's how I hold it once I deliver it. Can you let go? It requires trust. This process of change, of inward knowing and seeking a deeper understanding of Quaker life, is an education of the heart. Following the the inner voice requires being vulnerable and calling out to God to take over your life. Following the inner voice requires being vulnerable and calling out to God to take over your life. But here's the conundrum. If you're comfortable, do you have this need to have God take over your life? If you read early Quakers, something inside of them is not feeling comfortable, and they're dealing and struggling with that. They're noticing that their pride is coming out. Why am I not sitting on the facing bench? Okay, why is it those people? Whatever it happens to be inside of you that's coming out. Okay, they struggled with that. They struggled with that. They were not comfortable. And it's in that uncomfortableness that allowed them to move forward in their living testimonies. If your needs are being met in life and you're satisfied, do you feel a need to pray to God to take over your life? Not just once, but all the time. Many early friends opened to the discomfort. They couldn't avoid it. What early friends found was that in discomfort, we more readily turn to God. In discomfort, we more readily turn to God. So I'd like to do a little exercise here. I'd like you to consider some of these queries and just think about them and ponder them. How is your comfort getting in the way of your connection with the Spirit? How is your comfort getting in the way of your connection with the Spirit? Have you given over your life to God at any point? And if so, what was going on at that time? When have you experienced those deep connections with the divine? What did it look like? I'd like for you to choose a partner next to you. If you have a choice, the one that you don't know as well, but I'd like you to pair up if you're comfortable with that. Well, you probably won't be comfortable with that, but so find someone that you can pair up with. And I will raise my hand when I want quiet. So who doesn't have a partner? Okay. It's wonderful being with a group that understands hand signals. So if you haven't switched, you may want to consider switching. If one person's been speaking the whole time, you may want to consider having the other person speak. Is there any?
Yes.
No, everybody's been. Oh, good. We all know the process. So there's another thing I want us to think about. We come to meeting for worship to conduct business with an invitation to a mystery, the mystery of unity. How do you come prepared for that mystery? How do you know that the truth is there? And how hard do you have to hold on to it? Because others may not. It takes a lot of trust, this process of Quakerism. There's a story that I love to read to young friends, and I think it applies to all of us. It's about a young man named Benjamin Bangs, who was born in England in 1652. And our openings and our discernment to leadings comes in many forms. And this story is about Benjamin when he was about 19 years old. Because what I find when I read Quaker writings is that discernment requires opening to the mystery. And yes, many of them were theologically based. Some were. So let me read this story. This is from his journal. These are direct quotes. My friend was with me when the letter from my mother came to my hands, which I read to myself. But coming to the words that advised me to go to the Quakers' meeting, the evil nature got up in me and put me in such a passion that I could read no further, but to put the letter into my pocket. The first day followed. I went to take a walk, and after a little time a solid concern came over my mind, and this arose in my thoughts. What is the matter that thou canst not read thy mother's letter? With that, I went and sat down and read the letter with pleasure, and it arose in my mind to go to a meeting. However, the enemy of all righteousness suggested to me, thou knowest not where a meeting is. Following the mystery? But God very intelligibly opened on my understanding. Go down to Charing Cross, and there thou shalt see some of that people. Follow them. That wasn't one of those apps, we're crowdsourcing. This is 1671. So was he crazy or did he have trust? Upon this, yes. That's good. Upon this, I arose and went down to Charing Cross. And there I saw 5 or 6 of the said people, which was a confirmation to me that the opening was right. So I followed at some distance, and their habit with their solid behavior affected me. They were going to the meeting at Westminster, and when they came there, they went in. But I stood at the door for a while. Here the enemy was at work again. Now you know why they prayed to God, take over my life. But they had these things that kept going on inside of them. And you read this all the time in the stories. Here the enemy was at work again, and would have persuaded me to go away, intimating that if some of my old acquaintance came, they would but laugh at me. But the better part prevailed. It was not long before one stood up, so I guess he went inside. It was not long before one stood up, and I thought to take good notice of what he said. But so many wandering thoughts prevailed that I got no benefit thereby. Doesn't sound familiar, I'm sure. He sat down, and in a little time another stood up. And I said to myself, well, I resolve I will mind what this man says. But it was only a few minutes before my wandering thoughts got to Holland, and from thence I thought of going to France. But meeting with a secret check in myself for this vain imaginations, I gave a stomp upon the floor with my foot, which caused the eyes of those in meeting to be upon me. Can you believe this? So, in fervency of spirit, I said to myself, what is the matter that I cannot be master over my own mind? I saw I was altogether wrong and wanted inward strength to help me to get a staidness of mind upon God. I was made sensible that there was a spiritual warfare to be passed through, and that no staidness of mind could be attained to till the inward enemies of the soul came to be destroyed. This is a Quaker. Yes. Kind of different language, isn't it? In this state I continued some time, and my inward life decaying, I was brought very low as to my inward enjoyments. And that's something that I started to see, is that there's a dissatisfaction that starts to occur. And I have another story I could read later, which I probably won't because there won't be enough time. And it's about a woman named Elizabeth Ashbridge, who was born in 1713. It's a fascinating story. And she loved to dance. She was raised in the Church of England, so she learned to, I don't know if she learned there, but she was allowed to dance and sing, and she loved that. And then something inside of her changed, where that enjoyment went away. And that's the part that I think we need to listen to as Quakers, is that when our enjoyment is going away, we feel dissatisfied about something, that's when the Spirit's talking to us. Okay? So I was brought very low as to my inward enjoyments, which I had been formerly so plentifully supplied with, so that I began to grow a little careless, and the enemy stepped in with it, saying, thou art but young, and this is the only time for thee to take the pleasures of this world, and when thou art old, thou knows now how to get to what thou hast been so earnestly engaged in, to come to the knowledge of. Just wait till later. I'll become saintly then. But I'm young. I continued for some time in an unconsciousness of mind by which I sustained so great a loss that if I saw the faces of any of my friends, Quakers in the streets, I endeavored to avoid them, for shame covered me, believing they knew what a loss I was to come to. So this is the place where a lot of early Quakers get when they're saying, God, take over my life. Take over my life. So have you ever had an experience where you felt uncomfortable and that you really didn't have any control over yourself in the situation? Think about that time or those times. That's usually when the light is waking you up. When the light is waking you up. What I'd like to do now is I'd like us to hold a meeting for worship and just sit with what has been arising inside of you. And I'm going to end it about 10 minutes early, and I'm going to do a little closing. But I'd like us to just sit and worship together until I do that. The discernment process is sometimes difficult, but there's a gift at the end, and that's the unity we experience. Many feel worried about the demographics of the religious society of friends and our dwindling numbers. The love and tenderness of the Spirit touches a deep need and yearning in our society. If we are living the growing edge of the Spirit, people will gather. So how do we live the growing edge of the Spirit? I would suggest that our meetings begin to take the responsibility and stewardship of discerning leadings of our members as a central part of what we do. And here are some tools meetings can use. My home meeting, Santa Cruz, supports leadings. What we've done is that we have someone that's a leading social witness mentor. And the role of that person is just to keep an ear out for who has an inkling or a nudging. And people will come up to them and say, they do, or someone will hear something in a friendly sixes dinner, and they will talk to the person. And if the person feels that nascent leading or that nascent feeling deserves it, or they feel it's right, they help them to seek clearness by setting up a clearness committee that can meet no more than 3 times. So it's time limited. And the role of that clearness committee. And they educate the clearness committee. And they help the individual write up a statement of what their leading is to give to the clearness committee ahead of time. This is all written up in Rekindling the Fire article in Western Friend. So if you're interested in that, Betty DeValcourt was a co-author, and I know Mary can lead you to that article. I think there's several other tools we can use. One is that when we have friends with leadings, that we bring them into our meetings through clearness process. And if we minute their ministry, then set up an anchor committee that can sit with them. My anchor committee meets with me about every 6 weeks. And they help me discern if I'm getting ahead of the Spirit or if I'm falling behind it. It's been a very important role for me. They play the role of an elder in this process, and it keeps me accountable to the minute that I have from the meeting in support of my work. I think another one is traveling in the ministry. That when we have individuals that are visiting other meetings or going to conferences, that we yoke them with an elder. That we take responsibility for the leadings that our individuals have. And I grew up in my yearly meeting with individuals like Alan Strain, and individuals like Ian Tierman, and individuals like many, Bob Schutz was one. They had these leadings, but they never brought them to their meetings. It wasn't something that they did. And I think it enlivens our meeting, and it creates a relationship between the Spirit and its unfoldment and our meetings. Another thing is that we can have learning from participating in experiments with the light. Rex Ambler's work is really wonderful in helping you get in touch with that light that will help lead us. Circles of Trust, Parker Palmer's work, if you can do that. If you want to develop a visceral IQ, some intelligence and visceral learning, you might want to try focusing. Focusing is a very good methodology for doing that. You might want to try the Feldenkrais method. It's very effective. Same with Alexander technique, Hakomi method. There are different methods to develop your visceral IQ, and I think that's really important for us as friends, that we develop that capacity, because it is embedded in our faith and our approach. So what I'd like to do is to end this time together with Isaac Pennington. He wrote this poem. Give over thine own willing, give over thine own running, give over thine own desiring to know or be anything, and sink down to the seed which God sows in thy heart, and let that be in thee, and grow in thee, and breathe in thee, and act in thee. And thou shalt know by sweet experience that the Lord knows that and loves and owns that and will lead it. Thank you.